Sometimes I think I have to be careful about dismissing really good football players when I see them just because maybe they don't have the ideal size, or maybe they don't have this intangible, or maybe they have this concern or that concern. Because when you watch them, you just know you're seeing a really, really good football player. Not for the college level, for the NFL level. And while, yes, I have a higher grade on Tremaine Edmunds and feel like he's the number one linebacker prospect in this draft, that to me is more about Tremaine Edmunds and that size athleticism combination and the upside of what he could be than it is so much an indictment against Roquan Smith. I do not want to get it twisted here. I want people to clearly understand. I do believe in Roquan Smith significantly. Yes, I have Tremaine Edmunds graded higher, but there's not that much of a gap. I look at Roquan Smith, and I feel like I'm seeing a dude. I feel like I'm seeing a dude that could be a star at the NFL level. And I know most of the draft experts and the draft media and draft Twitter would agree that they look at Roquan Smith and they see a star, if not a superstar. And I understand it. I get it. And I am not here to disagree with it. To me, besides one or two concerns, he's a very, very safe pick. You feel like just in terms of as a pure prospect, as a pure player, he's one of the guys most likely to pan out and realize his full potential in this draft class as much as anybody else that might not be named like Quentin Nelson. And you'll see a lot of people have Roquan Smith as a top 3, top 5, and definitely top 10 player in the draft. And again, I completely am on board with what they're thinking. Because the dude is a stud. And it's obvious to see when you watch him at Georgia. He can absolutely fly. Not just straight ahead speed, which is what the 4.51 40 at the combine showed you. But he's a guy that has that lateral agility, has quickness, speed that translates in all different roles in all different ways. He has sideline to sideline range, even better than a Tremaine Edmunds does. He's a little bit quicker in theory. More so, too, is he's a much more instinctual football player. Like, when I'm talking about linebackers, it's the one thing that makes me hedge my bet a little bit about Tremaine Edmunds is he's not a very instinctual and aware football player. I feel like his football IQ is way behind where his pure physical upside is. But Roquan Smith, his physical upside he's close to already, and his football awareness and instincts and feel for the game are pretty much on par. He's got plenty of instincts to where you feel like he could kind of be an alpha dog in the middle of your defense in the linebacking core. He's a guy that's great at recognizing plays, reacting to plays quickly, but more so has the ability to diagnose before the snap and anticipate plays and what's going to happen. And that's the type of guy that you want as an inside linebacker potentially. A guy as the captain or anchor of your defense if he's making the calls. You want a guy that makes the quarterback react, not the one that always has to react to the quarterback. And I feel like Roquan Smith has that type of ability. And he's a really well-rounded player. Yes, he can get engulfed in times against the run, and sometimes he can be taken out when you run up the middle, and he takes himself out by not always filling the gap in the best way possible. But he's still a really good player against the run. That range means it's really hard to run outside on him, and he can utilize that quickness, that speed, that low center of gravity, that low pad level to be able to get underneath blockers, to be able to get through the gaps quickly. I mean, he can make plays all over the place still as a run defender. And this is a guy with that quickness, that burst, that speed, that athleticism, and that ability to get after it, just period. He's a guy with great pass rush potential as an outside linebacker in a 4-3 or an inside linebacker in a 4-3 or 3-4. He's a guy that you could deploy on a blitz, and he could make some of those splash, momentum-changing type of plays, be a 4 to 6 sack a year guy just because of that sheer burst and some of the things that he could do as a pass rusher. The way he can set up guys and just flat out make them miss, the awareness that he has to be able to time his blitz and be incredibly effective there and shoot the right gap, identify the right gap. And the crazy thing is that's not even his best attribute. His best attribute is coverage. He's definitely got the athleticism to play man-to-man against running backs, tight ends. Yeah, he'd be giving up size to tight ends, but how are they going to get open unless they just ragdoll him because they're not going to be able to outrun him? He's too fluid, quick, and athletic for them to be able to get a ton of space. He can even, in certain situations, defend against slot and outside wide receivers, especially if that's what audibles dictate that the defense has to do. So he has true 3-4 down linebacker ability. You feel confident enough that he will make enough plays to compensate for some of the deficiencies in the running game to where you keep him on the field in first and second down and in obvious run situations to where you get to where he really makes the most impact, which is as a pass rusher and specifically in coverage. The only thing he has to worry about a little bit in coverage is that he can get a little too physical in man, but as a guy 6'1", 236 pounds, he's going to have to find ways to try and play a little bit bigger, which in coverage I feel like he does. He's a pretty solid tackler. He can make some big hits. He's pretty good, especially at tackling high, which might not be how you want to make your living necessarily, but he squares up very well. Plays relatively hard. There's not a lot to not like about him. In fact, there are only two real concerns I have about him. And they are concerns, and I feel like they're valid concerns and shouldn't be instantly dismissed. Because one, and especially the second one, could have an impact on just how good Roquan Smith could be in the NFL. Number one is the size. There are times I've watched him at Georgia the last 2 years and thought maybe he's better in the NFL as a 4-3 weak side backer. Playing him off the middle, playing him outside, I feel it's a better place to utilize maybe his pass rush ability. It's a more natural place for him to play in coverage, especially in man. Maybe that's the better fit for him because do I really want to have him plunging into the middle of the line 40 whatever times a damn game where he could potentially get engulfed? Is that really the best utilization for him, his athleticism, his range? I don't know. Now, he's technically, yes, big enough to play middle linebacker, and even with some of the problems he has in terms of disadvantages with size and the lack of strength, he does enough other things in other areas to compensate for that and make up for that, where you would like him to get better, but even if he doesn't, he could still be an asset against the run. So I feel maybe some teams are debating whether he is better as a middle backer in a 4-3 or an inside backer in a 3-4, or he's better as a weak side backer in a 4-3. I think everybody feels like in those systems that he can play. It's just a matter, and play very high level, it's just a matter of where he's going to be best utilized. So that question doesn't concern me as much as potentially the durability concern. Now, that said, I don't recall him missing any games over the past 3 seasons. So regardless of what happened, he was able to answer the bell and play. But this is a guy that had surgery on a torn ligament in his wrist before 2016. He had a shoulder injury that forced him to miss spring ball in 2017. He got a medical red flag at the combine that was later reevaluated and he was given the all clear. But when you talk about that lack of size, especially if you're talking about him playing on the inside and some of the previous issues that he's had, I do have a little bit of a concern if he's going to be able to hold up. And I think that's the thing that really holds me back from saying that this guy is a top 3 or top 5 prospect in this class, is that lack of size and some of the previous injuries, and could there potentially be some challenges with durability and being able to stay healthy. And yes, he was able to answer the bell in college, but could we get to a point in time where he takes that abuse inside in the NFL and he's going to be missing a few games every year? That's the thing that's more concerning to me. When I look at Roquan Smith, I see a couple of different guys. I even go to the Jaguars. I feel like if you're playing him inside, he reminds me quite a bit of a Miles Jack, or if you go to the Minnesota Vikings, in some ways he reminds me of maybe an Eric Kendricks. If you're playing him outside as a weak side linebacker, I think he reminds me of Telvin Smith in terms of Telvin Smith's ability to kind of do it all. But make no mistake about it, Roquan Smith is a stud. I would be stunned if he falls past pick 10 or 11 in this draft, because the talent level is just that good with him and Edmonds both personally. And if anything, I look at a guy like Roquan Smith and my raw grading and how he was graded overall, and it gives me a greater indication that my grading scale needs some significant work, and I'm probably going to do away with it after this year's draft, because it's not necessarily reflecting the true reality for some of these guys. Like, if you look at my grading, you think there's more of a gap between Tremaine Edmonds and Roquan Smith than there is in reality in my mind. Yeah, Roquan Smith is a stud, and he should be a top 10 pick in this draft, and he should be, barring injury, a really good player for the next 8 to 10 years at least, making Pro Bowls and becoming a star.